Hello everyone, this video will explain anatomical position and direction, the appendicular and axial skeleton, and the 5 classifications of bones, with using basketball drills and exercises that I use as a way to describe it. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. So let's first describe the anatomical position, which is defined as the starting point of anatomy, with feet facing forwards, palms facing outwards, with fingers spread, and the entire body erect. As you see with the well-dressed man standing right there, that is an example of the anatomical position. So how do we get from the anatomical position to our offensive and defensive basketball stance? For defense, first we abduct our legs and arms, engage our legs in flexion, and a personal preference of mine, I like to have one arm extended laterally and one distally, depending on which hand the offensive player is dribbling with. For offense, our legs are the same position as for defense, but our arms are pronated, and our dribbling arm is in repeated flexion, extension, and circumdention motion. And I also like to keep my off arm adducted to help protect the ball from defenders and also have a faster pull up. Next we have the anatomical planes of the body. First we have the frontal plane, which divides the body into anterior and posterior. Then we have the horizontal or transverse plane, which divides the body into superior and inferior sections. And finally we have the sagittal or mid-sagittal plane, which divides the body into equal left and right sections. So our first movement is a side step, or in basketball what is called a defensive slide. This movement is in the frontal plane and it is performed by repeated adduction and abduction in the legs. Next we have movement in the sagittal plane, which can just be basically running down the court with the basketball. Again, this move is just performed with simple flexion and extension. I also just throw a couple snatchbacks in there just to help with backwards momentum. Lastly, we have our movement in the horizontal or transverse plane. A movement in basketball would be right here, the spin move, as we are doing a twisting motion with our entire body. The skeleton can be divided into the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton is composed of the skull, vertebrae, ribs, and sternum with a total number of 80 bones, while the appendicular skeleton is made up of everything else: the shoulder, hip, arms, and legs, which has a total number of 126 bones. Next we have the 5 classifications of bones. First we have the short bones, which act as good shock absorbers. These are located in the wrist and ankle. Next we have long bones like the femur and the humerus, which mostly serve for movement. Then we have flat bones like the skull and the scapula, which serve to protect the underlying organs. Next we have irregular bones like the face and vertebrae, which fulfill special functions. And finally sesamoid bones, which help extend the tendons. Also, just before we start, none of these exercises or stretches will contain flat bones, because flat bones don't necessarily move and are just there to serve as protection. So for our first stretch, we have good mornings. I included this stretch because it acts as a way to include the axial skeleton with the way it uses the trunk to help push the upper body out and gets a good stretch for your hamstrings. Next we have wrist curls. I included this exercise because it involves the short bones in the wrist and also activates the muscles in the forearm, which are good for grip strength. Next we have knee jumps, one of my favorite explosive exercises. I include this exercise because it includes the long bones of the legs and really helps with jumping ability, which is an important aspect for basketball. Next, I included neck rotating exercises because they incorporate bones in the irregular classification of bones, like the vertebrae. And also, I find that having a very flexible neck just helps alleviate neck stiffness, which I sometimes get a problem with in basketball for unknown reasons. And finally, we have knee rotations. I included these exercises because it deals with the patella, the only sesamoid bone in the body. And there was actually a study conducted on the patella, and it concluded that knee rotations actually help secure the patella in its position and will help with internal and external rotations of the knee.